I'm gonna sit with you guys for a little while today. I want you to get comfortable. I mean, really comfortable, because what we're going to talk about, it's not light and it's not going to be quick either. And I need you to know from the beginning that wherever you are right now, whatever it is that you're feeling, it's okay to be here with me in this. So take a deep breath if you need to. And I really truly mean that. Sometimes we forget that it's okay for us to breathe.
Honey, I used to pray for peace in places that only caused me pain. Tried to fix broken people just to feel whole again. Lost myself trying to be enough for everyone but me. Now I breathe through the ache. I sit with my silence. I found power in the pause. And baby, this is my rebirth. Melodic, catchy and repeatable. This the soft life anthem, rebirth season. No more chaos, I found my reason. Breathe in peace, exhale my demise. I don't chase love now, I become the freedom. The storyteller episodes, blending kids, one soul, no time for regrets. Used to cry in the dark, now I coach through the depths. Lost my job, lost myself, but I found my breath. Turned pain into power, yeah. I live with no debt. Debt to my body, debt to my truth. I journal my trauma, I mothered my youth. The girl I used to be had to grieve it too. But the woman I'm becoming, that's the breakthrough. Melodic, catchy and repeatable. This the wonder body's dead to none and fitting twas. Tried it, emotional build, channel building.
Hey y'all, hey, welcome back to another episode of Truth, Trust, and Trajectory with your girl, Nchukym Bee. This is a space where we talk about things that have shaped us, the patterns we're still unlearning, and the messy, slow work of becoming someone who doesn't have to betray themselves in order to feel safe. And today we're going to talk about something that I've lived in my bones for most of my life. We're talking about silencing yourself to make other people comfortable. Not occasionally, not just in certain situations. I mean the deep, learned, bone level practice of disappearing so someone else doesn't have to feel the difficulty. And before I go any further, I want to let you guys know that I'm currently in the pre launch phase of something that I've been working on for almost 6 months. It's called the Survival Mode Detox program. It's not a course in the way that you guys might think. It's a guided process for people who realize that they've been living in survival responses that used to protect them, and now they're just overly exhausted. This is for people who are starting to notice that things that once kept them safe as a kid are also the same things that silence them as adults. We're going to talk more about this towards the end, but I want you to know it exists because everything I'm about to share with you comes from that same space. The place where we start to see our patterns not as our personality, but as what we had to become in order to adapt. And adaptation can change. So let's start where it actually started for me, because I didn't learn to be quiet because I was shy. I learned to be quiet because it was safer than the alternative. So from the age of 13 until I signed myself out at 21, I essentially grew up in foster care in group homes. For me, it was a rotation of places that were never truly mine. And I need you to understand something that is kind of instability. It teaches you things that other people don't have to learn. It teaches you that the adults in the room also might not be safe. It teaches you that asking for something can get you labeled as difficult. And it also teaches you that your feelings are often treated as inconvenient, or worse, as a problem that needs to be managed. So you learn not to have them, essentially, or at least you learn not to show your hand to other people. I remember being a kid and already knowing that my tone mattered way more than what it was that I was actually trying to convey. I could ask a question, a completely reasonable question, and if my voice had the wrong inflection, if it sounded even a little bit like I was questioning authority, I would automatically get shut down. So there was no answer that concluded to the question. It was just completely shut down. And the message for me that I got over and over was that how I made someone feel was more important than my needs at that time. That my job in itself was to manage the emotional temperature of the room, even when I was the child in the room. And here's the one thing that I don't think people talk about enough. When you grow up like that, you get really good at reading people. And essentially, that turns into hypervigilance. You learn to scan the room, and you scan the room the very second that people walk into it. You learn to track someone's mood by the way they close the door or the rhythm of their footsteps. And you learn that that version of yourself is safest to be given in any moment. And people praise you for it. They praise you for shutting down. They praise you for being silent. They praise you for being agreeable, even when the circumstances you shouldn't agree to it, right? They call you mature. They say that you're so easy, you're so understanding, you're so low maintenance. But the thing that they were really telling me is you don't ask for much. You don't make me uncomfortable. You've learned how to take care of my feelings all whilst I'm ignoring yours. That that's not maturity. That is survival. I was called mature for my age more times than I can ever really account for. And for a long time, I wore that like it was a badge of honor because I didn't know what else to do with it. But now that I look back, I can see what that label actually meant. It meant that I had to learn how to self regulate in an environment where no one was co regulating with me. It also meant that I had to learn not to need too much because needing too much made me vulnerable. And vulnerability in unsafe environments is a very dangerous concoction. It meant that I had to learn how to disappear emotionally so that I can stay physically safe or at least physically tolerated. And I think the most wildest part, and that is the part that I'm still unraveling even till this day, is that I brought all of that into adulthood without even ever realizing it. Because here's what happens when you learn these patterns at a young age. They don't feel like patterns. They feel like that's who you are. They feel like your personality. And so when I found myself in my 20s, with my ex-husband, romantic relationships where I stayed quiet even when I was fundamentally dying on the inside, where I would over explain every feeling instead of just stating what it was that I actually needed, and where I avoided conflict like it was a life or death situation. I didn't think, oh, this is a trauma response. I thought, this is just how I am. I have to adapt. This is the only way that I will be accepted, by minimalizing myself. Someone who was easy to be with, and also someone that didn't require very much. And the one thing that comes to my mind is that I was repeating the same exact patterns that I learned as a kid. I was silencing myself to make someone else feel comfortable. And the cost of that, I didn't even start to see it until I was so far in that I didn't know how to get out. And I have to be the first to tell you guys, obviously, because it's my story, what that looked like. I would be in a relationship and something would happen, something that hurt me, something that crossed a boundary that I didn't even know that I was allowed to have. And I would feel it in my body. I would feel this tightness in my chest. I would feel knots in my stomach. This thing rising up in me that wanted to say, hey, that didn't feel okay. But before I could even get the words out, I would start managing it. So that way I didn't disrupt the environment or the person who would potentially be offended by me speaking up for myself. I would start thinking about how to say things in a way that didn't make the other person defensive. I would rehearse it in my head, and I would try to find the perfect tone, the perfect phrasing, the perfect moment to bring up an issue. And by the time I had done all of that, the feeling would have passed. Or I would have convinced myself that it wasn't that big of a deal. Or I would even decide that bringing it up would cause more problems than the solution itself. So essentially, I learned how to stay quiet, and I told myself that I was choosing peace. But I wasn't choosing peace. I was choosing silence. And silence is not the same thing as peace. What I know now, what I didn't know then, is my nervous system was doing exactly what it was trained to do. It was protecting me. When I was a kid, speaking up would mean punishment. It could mean being told that I was being disrespectful or I was being too sensitive. I would always hear that, don't take it that way. You're so sensitive. I know you're sensitive. It's not that, right? Just very dismissive. Or even I was making it up in my head, right? So the emotion, the feeling that came across when I felt like a boundary had been violated or disrespected is it's that's not I know that's how you feel, but that's not really what it is, which essentially boils down to you're making it up in your head, right? So the devaluating of emotion, and it could mean being ignored entirely, which in some way for me felt way worse than being yelled at, because at least being yelled at meant that I existed. So my nervous system learned that silence was regulating, that shutting down, staying small, and not rocking the boat, that was the only way that I was able to stay safe. And even in adulthood, even when I was in relationships with people who were not actively unsafe, my body didn't know that. It still was operating from the same blueprint that I had learned as a child. So, this is the one thing that we know from trauma research. Your nervous system, it doesn't distinguish between past and present the way that your brain does. It doesn't say, oh, you're safe now. You can relax. What it says instead is this feeling is familiar. And the last time you felt like this, you needed to shut down in order to survive. So let's do that again. And it happens so fast. It happens before you even ever have a chance to question it. You just feel yourself going quiet. You feel yourself smoothing things over. And you also feel yourself becoming easy again. But the thing is, it works. For a while, it works. The other person, they don't get upset. The relationship, it stays calm. You avoid conflict. But what you don't realize, what I didn't realize, is you're not actually avoiding conflict. You're internalizing it in real time. You're taking all of that tension, all of that hurt, all of that unspoken truth, and you're putting it deep down inside of your body. And your body always keeps the score. I started having panic attacks somewheres in my earlier mid 20s, out of nowhere. Or at least that's what it felt like at the time. I would be sitting at home, completely calm on the surface, and then suddenly my heart would start racing and I couldn't breathe and I felt like I was dying. And I couldn't figure out why that was happening because nothing was wrong on the outside. Nothing was happening. But that's the one thing. Nothing was happening because I made sure that it couldn't happen. I had gotten so good at keeping everything smooth, at managing everyone else's emotions, at staying quiet, that I had nowhere for my own feelings to go. So they came out sideways. They came out as anxiety, as major depressive disorder, as exhaustion, as this low level dread that I couldn't name. And I didn't connect it to the silence, not for a long time, not until I started getting into this work. I thought that I was just anxious. I thought that there was something wrong with me. And I didn't realize that what I was experiencing was the somatic cost of suppressing myself over and over and over again. That was my body trying to tell me something that I was not allowing myself to say out loud. So I want to come back to the relationships for a second because this is where things get really painful. And I want to be honest with you guys about this because I think that a lot of us carry shame around how long we stayed or how much we tolerated or how quiet we were. And I need you to know that this shame doesn't help. It just keeps us stuck, right? So I'm going to tell you what it looked like for me. And if it sounds familiar, I want you to know that you are not alone. I was the kind of partner who was praised early on. I was told that I was so understanding, I was so patient, so different from the others that they've dated. And I believed that was a good thing. I used to believe that meant that I was doing things the right way. But what that actually meant was that I had learned to make myself small enough that I didn't threaten anyone else's comfort. I didn't ask hard questions. I didn't push back. And I learned also not to make demands. It was easy. And easy feels good to people who don't want to be challenged. But here's what happens when you build your relationships on silence. When you finally do speak up, when you finally do set a boundary or naming something that hurt you or ask for something that you actually need, people get shocked. They feel disrespected. They get angry. They don't realize that you are allowed to ask these things and they don't recognize you because the version of you that they fell in love with was the version that didn't need anything at all. The version that didn't make waves, and suddenly you're asking them to relate to you as a whole person, and they don't know how. They don't want to because the relationship was never built for that. It was built for their comfort, not your stability. The first time that I really truly spoke up in a relationship, I mean really, really spoke up, not over explaining, not softening, just stating exactly what it was that I needed. The response that I got was very cold, callous, as if I was being so different, and the audacity, because this isn't like you. And that reaction, it broke something open inside of me because they were right. It wasn't like me. Or at least it wasn't like the version of me that had been performing for them, but it was like me. It was the part of me that I had been silencing for so long to keep them feeling comfortable. And the fact that they couldn't handle that, the fact that they saw my honesty as a problem, told me everything that I needed to know about what that relationship actually was. But even after that, even after knowing, I stayed longer than I should have. Because here's the one thing that happens when you have been silencing yourself for years: you don't trust yourself. You start thinking things like, maybe I was too harsh. Maybe I said it wrong. Maybe if I had just been calmer or kinder or clearer, they would have heard me a little differently. You start questioning your own reality. And you start to think that the problem isn't that you were silent for too long, but the problem was that you spoke up at all. And here's where all of this ties in, and it gets super duper duper insidious because the people who benefit from your silence will also most often reinforce that idea because they'll tell you that you're being too sensitive. They'll tell you that you're overreacting. They'll tell you that they don't recognize you anymore. And if you've already spent your entire life being told that your feelings are too much, that becomes really easy to believe. You might start thinking things like, maybe they're right. Maybe I am too much. Maybe I should just go back to being quiet. But you can't. You can't go back because once you start speaking, once you start noticing the cost of your silence, you cannot unsee or unknow it. You cannot unfeel it. And that's terrifying because it means that you have to make a choice. You have to decide whether you're going to keep betraying yourself to keep someone else comfortable or whether you're willing to risk discomfort, theirs and yours, for the chance to actually start being seen as you actually are. And I want to sit with that for a second because I think that this is where a lot of us tend to get stuck. Um, at one point, I was super stuck in a pattern, in a cycle that I knew that I had no business being in. And even though everything was crystal clear, I kept trying to gaslight myself into staying, right? Giving another chance and another chance and another chance and another chance and another chance. But the thing about it is, we think the choice is between silence and conflict. We think that if we speak up, we are choosing drama, that we're choosing chaos. But that's not what we're actually choosing. We're choosing honesty. We are choosing integrity, and we're choosing to stop self abandoning ourselves every time someone else might feel something difficult. That is their problem, not your burden. And yes, it might cause conflict. It might make people uncomfortable. It might mean that they don't like us as much. But the alternative is us disappearing. The alternative is that we spend our whole lives managing other people's feelings while ours go unmet. The alternative is that we become strangers to ourselves. And I don't know about you, but I refuse to do that anymore. I tried it. I tried it for years. I didn't like it. Therefore, I refuse to do it because the cost is too high. And for those of you that are wondering, what is the cost of it? Like, what can it cost? For me, it wasn't just the panic attacks, although those were very real. It wasn't just the exhaustion, although I was so tired I could barely function on some days. The real cost was that I stopped knowing who I was. I couldn't see the light that everybody else saw inside of me. I was not aware of it. I had spent so much time being what other people needed me to be, reading the room, adjusting my tone, managing the emotional temperature, that I had no idea what I actually thought, felt, or wanted for myself. I couldn't answer basic questions about myself. Someone would ask me what I like to do for fun, and I would freeze because I had no idea. I'd been so focused on other people for so long that Shakim disappeared. And the thing that finally broke me open, the thing that made me realize that I could not keep going like this, was the moment that I realized I was doing it to myself, even when nobody else was around. I would catch myself rehearsing conversations that had not happened yet, trying to figure out the safest way to say something, trying to anticipate how someone else might react so I could adjust before the conversation even took place. I was silencing myself preemptively. Essentially, I was managing ghosts. And I thought, what am I doing? What am I so afraid of? And the answer was, I was afraid of being too much. I was afraid of being difficult. I was afraid that if I showed up as I actually was, with all of my needs and my feelings and my boundaries, nobody would want me. I thought that I would be alone. And that fear, that deep bone level fear, was running my entire life. The thing that I'm learning now, and this is the part that I'm still in the middle of, the part that I don't have all the answers for. Being alone because you're being yourself is not the same as being alone because you've made yourself invisible. One of those is loneliness, whilst the other is solitude. And solitude, it turns out, is survivable. You can get over that. It's actually kind of necessary because you can't know who you are if you always have to adjust to be what somebody else needs. I think about the version of me that was praised for being easy, for being understanding and low maintenance. And I have so much adoration, love, and compassion for her now because she was doing the best that she could with the nervous system that she had. And she was surviving. But the thing about it, she wasn't living, she wasn't free. And freedom, I mean, real freedom, doesn't come from just being easy, it comes from being honest, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. That is the work that I do right now. It's the work that I want to invite you guys to if this resonated with you. It's the work of noticing when you're silencing yourself, of noticing when you're managing someone else's emotions instead of honoring your own, and of noticing when your body is saying one thing but your mouth is saying another. And then slowly learning to close that gap, learning to speak even when your nervous system is screaming at you to shut down. When you begin to start to learn to trust that you can survive someone else's discomfort and that you can survive your own honesty, that's when everything changes. And I just want to be very clear for a moment here. This is not a quick process. I really need to be very clear because I think a lot of people, you know, they start seeing things like, survival mode and nervous system reset healing. And we all want a quick fix, right? We want to feel better right now. I think the thing about that is you've endured years, even lifetimes, for a lot of you, of this trauma, right? Of this devaluation that happened with repetition. So you're not going to find a quick fix solution to feel better overnight. That's why I do this work. This is deep, slow, nervous system work. This is pattern interruption at the level of your body, not just your thoughts, because you can know intellectually that you deserve to speak up, that your feelings matter, and that you're allowed to take up space. But if your nervous system is still operating from a place of threat, if it believes that silence equals safety, you're going to continue to shut down. You're going to continue to choose the same toxic partners over and over again. You're going to continue to make yourself small. And it's not because you want to, but because that's the only thing that your body knows how to do. And you keep reinforcing it. And this is where the survival mode detox work comes in, because what I've realized both in my own life and in working with other people is we cannot think our way out of survival responses. That's just not a thing. We have to work with the nervous system directly. We have to be able to teach our bodies that it's safe to be seen and that it's safe to have needs. And also that you were put here to take up space and that it's okay to do so. But that doesn't happen overnight. It happens through a process of repetition, through slowly, gently challenging old patterns and rebuilding new ones. But before we go there, I want to get back to something I said earlier because I really do think that it's important. I said that silence became a survival strategy for me and not a personality trait. And I want to sit with that distinction for a minute because I think a lot of us confuse the two. We think this is just who I am, that I'm just someone who doesn't like conflict, that I'm just someone who goes with the flow. And I'm just an easygoing person. And maybe that's true for some people. Maybe there are some people who genuinely do not have strong opinions, who genuinely do not feel the need to assert themselves. And maybe there are people that feel peace in their own silence. But if you're listening to this and that feeling, that tightness in your chest, that knot in your stomach, that sense of recognition, I want you to consider the possibility that what you're calling a personality might actually be adaptation. It might be something you learned because you had to, not something that you chose because you wanted to. And if that's true, if your silence is a survival strategy and not a preference, then the question becomes, what is it that you're surviving? Because if you're still actively unsafe in your situation, then yes, silence might be the smartest thing that you can do at this moment. I'm not going to tell you to speak up if speaking up is going to put you in danger. That's not what this is about. But if you're safe now, if you're in relationships or environments where you're not actually actively under threat and you're still silencing yourself, then what you're surviving is the memory of a threat. You're surviving the past, and your body literally doesn't know the difference. And that's the part that used to make me so angry when I first started to understand it. I would think, why am I still doing this? I'm not a kid anymore. I'm not in foster care. I'm not in those group homes. I'm not around unsafe adults. Why can't I just stop? Why can't I speak up? And the answer is because my nervous system never got the memo. My nervous system was still running on the same program it was running on when I was 7 or 5 or 10 or 13. When I was 16, it was scanning for threats. It still kept trying to keep me safe the only way that it knew how. And that way was silence. But here's the thing about the nervous system. Your nervous system can unlearn old patterns and it can rewire and learn new things. They're not fixed, they're adaptive. That's literally their job. They adapt to keep you safe in unsafe environments, and they can adapt to help you gain and thrive in safer ones. But you have to be able to teach them. You have to show them over and over and over again that it's okay to speak and that you can survive the discomfort and that the world doesn't end the moment you decide to start taking up space. And that process, that teaching, it's not uncomfortable, right? Reverse. It is not comfortable. I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that it feels good. It's terrifying. Because every time you speak up when your body is telling you to shut down, you're going against years of conditioning. And you're going against the very thing that you learned that will keep you safe. And your nervous system interprets that as danger. So you feel all the danger signals. Your heart will start racing, your palms will sweat, your throat closes up, your mind goes blank, and every part of you will be screaming, stop, don't do this, it's not safe, but you do it anyway, you speak anyway, and you survive. And the next time, it gets a little less terrifying. And the time after that, less terrifying. And slowly, your nervous system starts to learn that speaking is not actually dangerous. That honesty isn't a threat. That you can be seen and still be safe. I remember the first time I set a boundary with someone and I didn't apologize for it. It was a small thing. Someone asked me to do something and I said no. They pushed back a little. And instead of explaining myself or softening it or finding a way to make it okay for them, I just let it sit. I said, I understand that it's disappointing for you, but my answer is still no. Then I stopped talking. I didn't fill in the silence. I didn't manage their feelings. I held my boundary. And it felt like I was going to die. I'm not exaggerating. I was at work and I remember, it came via text. And, obviously they threw a tantrum and everything inside of my body was trying to convince me that maybe if I just give in, maybe if I just do what they want me to do, it'll get more peaceful, it'll get calmer. I went into full blown panic attack. It felt like I'd done something super unforgivable. I felt like I had just ruined everything, right? And I had to sit with that feeling, that full body panic. But I also had to remind myself that I was safe and that this person being disappointed in me was not the same as me being in danger, that I could survive their discomfort and that I did not have to fix it. And you know what happened? Nothing. Nothing bad happened. They were disappointed. Boo hoo. They got over it. The relationship obviously ended, but the world didn't fall apart. I learned something my body had never known before. I learned that I could say no and still be okay. That was last year, and I still have to practice it. I have moments where I feel like I have to pull myself into silence to smooth things over, to make myself easy again. But I notice it now. I can see it happening. I can feel my body starting to shut down. And I can pause to ask myself, what am I afraid of right now? What do I think is going to happen if I speak? And usually, when I really look at it, the fear didn't match the reality. The fear is old. The fear is from a time when silence actually was the safest option for me. I'm not there anymore, and neither are you if you're listening to this. If you're recognizing this in yourself, I want you to hear me when I say this. You're not there anymore. Whatever it was that you survived, whatever taught you that silence was the only way to stay safe, it's not happening right now. You made it through. You're here. And the thing that protected you then, the thing that got you through it, does not have to run your life now. But knowing that intellectually and feeling it in your body are two completely different things. And this is where the work really gets granular, really embodied, because you can't just tell yourself to stop being hypervigilant. You can't just decide to stop people pleasing. And you can't think your way into feeling safe. You have to work with your body. You have to work with your nervous system. And then you have to practice in small, manageable ways, showing your system the old rules don't apply anymore. And that is why survival mode detox exists. That's what it's all about. It's not about fixing you because you're not broken. It's about becoming a different person because the person that you are, the one who learned to survive in impossible situations, that person is incredible. But that person also learned some strategies that are no longer serving you. And you get to make the decision, the choice, if you want to learn new ones. You get to teach your nervous system that silence isn't the only option, and that you can speak and still be safe, and that you can have needs and still be loved, and that you can take up space and you can still belong. I think about the relationships that I stayed in for way too long, the ones where I silenced myself over and over again until I didn't even know what I was silencing anymore. And I used to have so much shame about that. I used to think, how did I let that happen? How did I lose myself like that? But I don't see it like that anymore. I see a person who was doing exactly what she was trained to do. I see a nervous system that was running only on the program that it had. And I also see someone who eventually found her way back to herself. I learned that it was okay to speak even when I was terrified, and that it was okay to be alone, because that for me was more beneficial than being invisible with someone that didn't even see me. And I want that for you, that you can learn to speak even when everything in you is telling you to stay quiet, that you can also unlearn the silence that kept you safe and learn the honesty that will set you free, your own truth. But I also want you to be honest with you about what that looks like. Because I think that sometimes we have this fantasy that once we start speaking up, everything automatically gets better. Once we start setting boundaries, people will respect them. And the moment we start being honest, we're met with understanding. And sometimes that's true. Sometimes people in our lives, they will rise to meet us where we're going. Sometimes they're grateful for the honesty, and the relationship gets deeper and stronger because of it. But on the flip side, sometimes, and this is the hard part, sometimes they don't. Sometimes the people who loved you when you were quiet don't know how to love you when you're honest. The ones that praised you for being easy get uncomfortable when you start being real. Sometimes setting boundaries means losing relationships that were never built to hold the fullness of who you are. And that grief is real. I don't want to minimize that. It's painful to realize that some people only wanted the version of you that made them comfortable. It's painful to walk away from relationships that you've invested in, that you've tried to make work, that you hoped would be different. And it's painful to choose yourself when choosing yourself means being alone for a while. But here's the one thing that I know now that I didn't know then. Those relationships were not holding me. They were holding a version of me that I created in order to stay safe. And as long as you're in relationships that require you to be small, to be quiet, to be easy, you're not actually connected. You're performing, you're managing, and you're surviving. And I think that you deserve more than just survival. You deserve relationships where you can be messy and complicated and full of needs and still be loved. Where you can speak your truth and it be received, not punished. And where you don't have to choose between being honest and being wanted. These relationships, they exist. I promise you they exist. But you can't find them while you're still silencing yourself, and you can't attract people who value your voice if you're not using it. You cannot build intimacy, real intimacy, on silence. You just can't. So, yes, speaking up might cost you some relationships. It might mean that some people are going to leave. It might mean that you spend some time alone trying to figure out who you are without the constant work of managing someone else's feelings. But the alternative is that you stay silent for the rest of your life, that you shrink yourself, you stay small, you keep abandoning yourself in order to make other people comfortable. And I don't know about you, but I can't do that anymore. I did it for almost 3 decades, and it almost killed me. And I don't mean that in a metaphoric way. I mean the suppression, the constant vigilance, the never ending work of reading rooms and managing moods and staying quiet. It was destroying me from the inside out. My body was breaking down. My mental health was deteriorating. And I was having panic attacks, insomnia, digestive issues, chronic pain. And I kept thinking that something was wrong with me, looking for medical explanations, a diagnosis, something that would make sense of why I felt so bad all the time. And it took me so long to realize that what was wrong was that I was living a life that required me to betray myself every single day. And that I was carrying the weight of all of that unsuppressed truth inside of my body, and my body was buckling under the pressure. This is what we know from research on trauma and the body. Unsuppressed emotions, they don't just disappear, they get stored, they get held, and they show up in physical symptoms as chronic pain, dysregulation, and a lot of people, they will ignore it. They will ignore the fact that their body is trying to tell them something. And the thing about it is, if you keep ignoring it, if you keep pushing it down, if you keep silencing it, because it's going to find a way to be heard, it has to, because that's how bodies work. They keep the score. So when I talk about the cost of your silence, I'm not just talking about the emotional cost, although that's very real. I'm talking about the physical cost, the somatic cost, the way your body holds all the tension for all of the things that you are not saying, all the boundaries that you refuse to set, all the needs that you're not expressing, and the way that tension becomes pain, illness, and becomes a nervous system that is constantly on high alert because it knows somewhere deep down, it knows that you're not safe. Not because what's happening around you, but because of what is happening inside of you. Because you're abandoning yourself, and your body can feel that. And that's why this work has to be embodied. This is why you can't just think your way through it, because your thinking brain can understand all of this. Your thinking brain can know what you deserve to speak up on, and that your feelings do matter, and that you're allowed to have needs. But your body, your nervous system, it's been operating on a completely different level. It's been operating in survival. And survival doesn't care about what it is that you think you deserve. It cares about what keeps you alive. And if staying quiet has kept you alive when you were young, your body is going to keep defaulting to that until you teach it something different. And teaching it something different, that is the work. That's the practice. That's what I mean when I talk about the survival mode detox. It's not about detoxing from being a survivor. You are a survivor. That's not something you're ever going to get rid of. That's something that you should honor. But the mode, the survival mode, the constant state of threat, hypervigilance, silencing, shutting down, that mode is not serving you anymore. It did. At one point, it absolutely did. It saved you. But now it's keeping you small. And you get to learn a new way. You get to learn that your nervous system can feel safe even when you're speaking, that you can have conflict and still be okay, that you can disappoint someone and still be worthy of love, that you can take up space and still belong, but you have to practice it. You have to show your body over and over and over again, in small ways, then bigger ways, that the old rules no longer apply. And I'm not going to lie to you, it's uncomfortable and it is scary. And there are moments where every part of you wants to go back to silence because it feels familiar. And familiarity is safe, even when it's not. There are going to be moments where you speak up and immediately regret it, where you spiral into self-doubt and think, I should have just kept my mouth shut. There are also going to be moments where you set a boundary and the other person reacts badly. and you think to yourself, see, this is why I stay quiet. This is what happens when I speak. But I need you to remember, in those moments, their reaction is not proof that you shouldn't have spoken. Their discomfort is not evidence that you were wrong. Sometimes people react badly to boundaries because they benefit from you not having any at all. And sometimes people get upset when you speak up because they preferred you better when you were silent. And that tells you something very important about them, about the relationship, about what was actually happening all along. But it doesn't tell you that it should go back to silence. It tells you that you're finally starting to see clearly. And seeing clearly, I think, is very hard a lot of the time, because sometimes what you see is the relationship was never what you thought it was. That person you loved didn't actually love you at all. They loved the easy parts of you, the quiet parts, the parts that didn't ask for too much. And realizing that, grieving that, it's devastating. But it's also clarifying, because now you know. Now you can make a choice based on reality instead of hope. Now you can decide if you want to stay in a relationship that requires you to shrink, requires you to remain silent, or if you want to walk away and find something that can hold the fullness of who you are. And I know that feels impossible sometimes. I know it feels like too much to ask, because when you've been silencing yourself for years, when you've been making yourself small for as long as you can remember, the idea of being fully yourself, of speaking your truth, and even setting boundaries, or even taking up space, it feels dangerous. It feels like you are being rejected, like you're inviting people to leave. And maybe you are. Maybe some people will leave, but the ones who decide to stay, the ones who can actually meet you in your honesty, who can hold you in your fullness, who don't need you to be small in order to be comfortable, those are the people who are actually capable of loving you. Not the version of you that performs, but you. And I think that's worth the risk. That is also worth the discomfort. It's worth the grief of losing relationships that were never meant to last. Because I think the alternative is spending your whole life in relationships where you can never truly relax, where you're always managing, performing, and silencing yourself in order to keep the peace. But that's not peace, that's exhaustion masquerading as calm. So earlier I mentioned, and I think it's important because I don't want it to get lost, I talked about how silence becomes a way of managing other people's emotions and of keeping the temperature in a room at the level where it feels safe. And I want to be clear about something, because that's not your job. It was never your job. Even when you were a kid and the adults around you made it feel like it was your job, it wasn't. You were a child. You deserved to be cared for, not the one that was responsible for doing the caring. You deserve to have adults who could regulate themselves, who could hold their own emotions, who didn't need you to disappear so that they could feel okay. But that's not what happened. So you learn to do it anyway. You learn to read the room, to adjust your behavior, to make yourself small, so the adults around you didn't have to deal with the discomfort of your needs, your feelings, or your very existence. And that pattern, it doesn't just go away when you become an adult. It follows you. It shows up in your friendships, your romantic relationships, your work relationships. You find yourself doing the same thing that you did as a kid, managing, adjusting, silencing, because that is what your nervous system has been trained to do. So I want you to hear this. You get to stop, and it's okay. It doesn't belong to you. So I'm going to need you to put that down. You get to say, that was never mine to carry. I don't have to carry it anymore. And you get to let other people feel their own emotions. You get to let them be uncomfortable and to prioritize your own emotional truth over their emotional comfortability. And yes, they might not like it. They might push back. They might tell you that you're being selfish or difficult or too much, but those are their feelings and they get to have them and you get to let them. This is one of the hardest things that I've had to learn, and I'm still unlearning it. I still catch myself trying to manage someone else's reaction before I've ever even said anything. Sometimes I'll try to soften my words, adjust my tone, or make myself smaller so they don't feel uncomfortable. My honesty is not an attack. My needs are not a burden. And if they can't handle me being real with them, that's information, that's data that tells me something about the relationship and where I actually stand in it, right? And sometimes the answer is not much. Sometimes the relationship can't hold your honesty. Sometimes it was built on your silence. And when you start speaking, it'll fall apart. And that's painful. But it's also freeing because now you know. So I want to close up this episode because we've gone over an hour. In case you guys forgot from the beginning, the Survival Mode Detox preset launch is currently on my website. You can find it at Nchukym I do have a free guide that actually gives you step-by-step instructions on how to identify your trauma, right? I think I included a tracker, an emotional tracker as well, because I think a lot of the times when we come up in survival mode, right, and we learn these patterns, we never fully truly learn how to name our emotions. So I've included that in the free guide as well. Make sure you guys go over to my website, check it out. I have a bunch of very resourceful and helpful tools that will not only help you identify whether you're in survival mode, but it also helps you start addressing and breaking, interrupting these patterns, right? So it's not just a problem, there's solutions as well. And I want to thank you guys so much for spending this last hour with me. Thank you for doing this work, however it shows up for you. And make sure to remember that you survived by silence, but you get to thrive by honesty. And if this message hits you, please make sure that you subscribe, hit the notification bell so you never miss another post. Make sure to leave me a comment and a review. You guys can find me throughout all social media platforms. I'm most active on Facebook and Instagram. Nchukym Bee Life Coach is where you can find me. And also make sure you guys check out the link in my bio. And until next time, this has been your girl, Nchukym Bee, with Truth, Trust, and Trajectory, where healing meets transformation. Okay, bye.